Hello, welcome back to the podcast. We have an expert guest today and an interview with Dr. Eric Balcavage. I interviewed him years ago now. It was back, I released it in May 2020, but I think we spoke several months before that. And that one is episode 71, and it was called How to Identify and Address Cellular Hypothyroidism. And back then he was in the works of creating his book. And in the episode, we mentioned how it was going to be released like very soon, but it actually only got released this summer, so in 2022. But it was worth the wait. He actually covers in the episode today why it took so long, and he actually made many different changes to his approach to the writing, which I found very interesting and honest of him. But if you're not sure who Dr. Eric is, I will just give you a little overview now. So he is the owner and founder of Rejuvagen, a functional medicine clinic in Glen Mills, Pennsylvania. He's a nationally recognized speaker and educator on various health-related topics, including thyroid physiology, bile physiology, detox, oxidative stress, methylation, and chronic illness. And he's been in private practice since 1996. He is a certified nutrition specialist, a certified functional medicine practitioner. He's board certified in integrative medicine, along with being a licensed chiropractor in Pennsylvania. He actually started off in medicine, but then moved to holistic health and chiropractics after going through a car accident. He shares more about his story in episode 1. I highly recommend listening to this first because we cover more about the science of the thyroid and more about lab testing and numbers and all of that, whereas in today's episode we go a little bit deeper, and it's kind of like a part 2 now that his book's out and I've got time to read through it. I made sure not to repeat the same questions again. Dr. Eric is also the co-host of the Thyroid Answers podcast, and this podcast focuses on answering the pressing questions those with chronic hypothyroid symptoms can't get answered elsewhere. He has educational videos on Vimeo and YouTube. He's made it his mission to change the way that medicine looks at hypothyroidism. And his new book, The Thyroid Debacle, which was co-authored with Dr. Kelly Halderman, another practitioner that I've interviewed, and we'll link in the podcast notes below as well. But his aim was to address problems with the conventional and current allopathic model, even the functional medicine approach to hypothyroidism, and also give you plenty of solutions to walk away with and start implementing. It's now available to purchase. In today's episode, we did a bit of an overview, the importance of addressing the thyroid holistically, how something called the cell danger response is massively linked to hypothyroidism and many other conditions as well. The impacts of stress, both external stress, but also the stress that we can do to ourselves on our health journey in trying to find the problem, the root cause, researching for hours and hours. We've both been there. So he touches on his experience with clients and how sometimes asking them to do less and take less supplements and take a step back can actually move the needle for them. The stress of different forms of exercise and different forms of anaerobic and aerobic exercise, and which one is going to be best for you if you're trying to overcome health issues. We speak about how the thyroid impacts the immune system both ways. So when you have an underactive thyroid, how you're more at risk of certain immune system imbalances, but then when you have immune system problems, you can develop Hashimoto's, etc. It's a two-way street. Very interestingly, we speak more about hypoxia and breathing. He only touched on this in the first episode, so I wanted to learn a little bit more, but I have a full episode on this with Dr. Michael Gelb. It's episode number 65 on dental health, oral health, and how mouth breathing at night could actually be driving the cell danger response, put your body into stress, and could be causing you to wake up in the night to go to the bathroom, which many of you will be experiencing. And the importance of clean air, clean food, clean water, which are my absolute foundationals, especially long-term as maintenance once you've done the bulk of the healing work. But we were chatting about mold before we press record, and I was just sharing, since I last spoke to him, I had my whole mold journey experience, and he said that he's been obviously aware of it and working with mold, but he doesn't put the blame fully on mold. And I was like, I completely agree with you. I think it's a big factor. It's overlooked for many people, but there's also the people who like just place all the emphasis on mold. And I fell into this camp for myself when I first found out that I had an issue. I was like, this is the answer. This is the cause of all of my issues. Once I fix mold, everything's going to be fine. Completely forgetting about all of the other ways that I was wrecking my health and had done for the years prior to that. So we have a similar stance on mold. We talk about iron and how he believes a lower ferritin level is actually a good sign of health, and how a higher ferritin, like we're usually taught to aim for, could actually be a sign of oxidative stress and inflammation. So lots of interesting subjects here, and it was great to catch up with him again. And I hope you enjoy the episode. Hello again, Dr. Eric. Thank you for joining me for a second time.
Well, thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah, we have more to talk about. I'm sure that you're never out of content for ideas. You have your own podcast that you talk about thyroid all the time. And yesterday I spent time looking back over the last episode that we did and making sure that we're not going to cover the same things again. So just a reminder, if you haven't listened to part 1 of this interview, go back. It was episode number 70, and it was released in May 2020, which seems like a lifetime ago, but also about 2 minutes now that we're on the call together. And a lot has happened in the world since that as well. And I was just wondering, with your book, even your book was meant to be, we were talking about it on the episode, like the book's going to be released shortly, and then it's been like another 2 years. Has that mainly been because of all of the craziness in the world?
Yeah, we went through a lot of changes after that. We changed publishers when this crazy thing came out called COVID. Obviously, that changed some things in the publishing world as well. And the publisher at the time said, hey, we're going to shelve this for a bit. And I was, and Kelly and I had a conversation, Kelly, my co-author, and we said, hey, we don't want to wait, another year or 2 years for this book to come out. Let's just take it back and we'll figure this out. And it still took 2 years and another publisher and rewriting it. But I think it was a good, even though we got to the point that definitely I got to the point that I was ready to divorce it by the time we were, it's finally ready. The delays and the change allowed a lot of change in the book. And I think the initial time of the book, there was more of a angriness, I think, towards allopathic medicine. And by having that delay, we kind of took some of that out and realized that, hey, we're trying to build a bridge here and not create animosity, and medical physicians are doing what they're trained to do. And while we may not agree that it's the best strategy from a functional medicine approach, that's really not their approach. Their approach is to diagnose a thyroid disease and manage it. And that's okay. There are people that don't want to do a more functional approach. There are people that just want to be able to take their medication. And for some people, they take their medication and they feel awesome. So we need that approach, but that then gives room for another approach, which is what functional medicine should be, is especially in the world of hypothyroidism or thyroid dysfunction, is the ability to come in and say, okay, we know there's damage to the thyroid gland, but why is there damage occurring, and what can we do to reduce what's causing the damage to the gland? And we also know that there's a large percentage of people who don't do a great job converting T4 to T3, and we need to help people understand why that's occurring. And I think to some degree there's a problem in the functional and integrative community where we tell people that they've lost the ability to convert T4 to T3 versus this is probably an adaptive response to some type of excessive stress load. And that makes a big difference, because people, if they're thought that they can't do it anymore, then the only solution is to give T3, and that in itself creates a roller coaster of problems for a lot of people. And if we switch that to, hey, this is adaptive physiology, your body's not converting T4 T3 for an adaptive reason, then we just have to look for the reason. And when we do find the reason, then you all of a sudden you start to say, hey, I've addressed the reason. Now I'm converting T4 to T3. Now my thyroid gland is able to make more T4. And I'm able to convert it and I feel better and my tissue response is better. And that's really why we wrote the book, and really what we want people to understand is that instead of looking at the physiology and saying, oh, it's broken, the body woke up one day and doesn't realize that that's my thyroid gland, that I think we have to get rid of that model.
Yeah, and I love that you emphasize the wording, the language, how you talk to people about it. And it's the body is protecting you at the end of the day. It's slowing you down so that you stop like behaving in a certain way, over exercising, some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. And I also love that you're like really honest about the book and saying how it started off as like really angry attack. It's kind of like when people say, if you want to have a conversation with someone, like write out an email, get all of your thoughts out, and then sleep on it, come back the next day, and then maybe edit it a little bit.
Yeah, and you know what? It was nice to I had a chance to give a bunch of non-functional medicine people a chance to read it. And some of my family members who were just people who, just lay people, and they're like, you sound angry, right? And I was like, man, okay. At first I was like, what are you talking about? But then after thinking about it, I was like, okay, well, let's soften this up. And I think it wound up being a better book. I mean, the book has been rewritten probably, I don't know, 5 times in that 2-year span, where we just kept rewriting chapters. You get it back and you kind of rewrite it again. And but at some point you just have to say, you know what, I'm tired of reading this, and I just have to say enough's enough. Because every time I would get it back from the editor, I would be like, well, I've learned something else. Let me add another piece in here.
It's been a learning journey for you.
Yeah. And so, but it's funny now that by the time it was the last read through, I was like so sick of reading it.
Well, I don't care if there's mistakes and the errors, like just let it go.
And then now I have my book on my desk. I've highlighted my own book, right? And so it's one of those things where I think it's a great reference tool. And there's things that I know I said in the book that I'm like, man, I said something in the book that I like the way I said it. I got to go back and find where I said it and use that again, So I'm happy with the way it came out.
I'm happy with it as well. Your team very kindly sent me a copy, so I've got it here. Thyroid Debacle, and I was reading through it, and even I was learning things. And I've heard you talk like for hours and hours and hours on your podcast, and like I said, I've spoken to you before, but it's still packed with information. And I think it's great because even with my clients, sometimes they come to me and they're very angry against the allopathic system because they've been let down, and I was like that too because I got missed for so many things. They weren't testing things that I was asking for. They told me that diet has 0 impact on my symptoms, which is just ridiculous to think of. But it's nice to come to that middle ground where you can turn to them when needed. If you get in a car accident, they're amazing. If you need a life-saving surgery, that's what they're there for. So it's nice to have like that bridge. And I think your book does a really good job at that. And I really enjoyed reading it.
Well, I appreciate it. And it's a delicate, we tried to make sure that somebody who doesn't know anything about what's going on could pick up the book and be able to read through it and get something from it, versus it's just written for the medical community, so it's too heavy for somebody to read, or it's just written for the lay community and it's almost too simple for a clinician, right? So we tried to find the blend. I hope we did that. And then I think the other
thyroid guidebook, like everything you could possibly want to know, all of the science, and then all of the practical tips as well.
Yeah, and I think I was asked, I got a comment I've had this comment from a couple people that said, how come you didn't tell us like what supplements to use? And I'm like, we did that on purpose.
That would have been
because
me. That would have been me 5 years ago. Like buy a
Mhm,
book and then just go straight to the back, like
mhm.
searching for like what doses of magnesium I should take.
Right. And the problem with that, as you learned, right, is that you wind up reading a book, adding supplements, read another book, add some more supplements, read another book, add some more supplements. Before you know it, you're taking 15, 20 different supplements a day, and you don't know, you think you need them all because you read it in a book, but you may not need any of them, right? Because they may not be strategically helping you improve. And that's usually what I tell most people when I start with them. It happened yesterday. My last client of the day yesterday is taking 18 different supplements, right? And so, like, what can you help me with? Well, number one thing I want to help you with is we're going to start leaning out the load of supplements you're taking and be more strategic, fewer things, layer them in, get rid of them as we've used them for what we need to do. Because I just see too many people in my world where they come in and they're taking 10, 15, 20 different bottles of supplements, let alone 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 capsules of each bottle per day. You're getting quickly up to, I had one person taking about 200 capsules per
Like
day.
handfuls per meal, isn't it?
Yeah, and they're a functional medicine practitioner, right? And so I think they were angry at first when I said we're going to get rid of all these, and they're like, "I need them all." I'm like, "If you need this many supplements to be sick, you don't need any."
Mm-hmm.
So I want to. That's the big reason. So, but what we put in there, and you talked about it, was what are the things that almost anybody can do to start changing and improving their health and quality of life. And each one of those chapters in part 3 could be a book in it itself, right? So I did have a dentist give me text me and say, "Hey, you left out a whole bunch of stuff on obstructive sleep apnea." I'm like, right,
Oh yeah.
because that's not this book. I talked about respiration and breathing, but I can't write the depth. And I'm like, just
And if
go
someone
get a book on
resonates
sleep.
with, yeah, if someone resonates with like the sleep part, then they could learn a little bit more about that from somewhere else. But they can't expect
Yeah,
one person to completely cover everything, every possible option.
right. So, but I think we hit it on all the key pieces of the health foundations that somebody could say, oh, I need to learn more about breathing than what's here. Great. Pick up Wim Hof's books. Pick up Buteyko breathing techniques, right? Pick up Nestor's book called Breath, right? So there's a ton of books that are out there really detailed on each topic. This book is meant to give you the foundation. Like, these are the key aspects of health that you need to focus on, and probably need to focus on before you start considering which load of supplement bottles I need to start putting in. Because most people think, hey, I can just take an antibiotic or a probiotic, and a probiotic's a probiotic, and doesn't understand the depth. Or any B vitamin is going to be, any B12 is good. Well, no, they're not, right? And there's, all folic acid is the same. Well, folic acid is a type of B9, but it may not be the type that you need, and especially given some of the things that we can learn about the physiology and the chemistry. So I think it is not just a book that's going to help somebody with thyroid physiology, but it's a book that's going to help somebody understand what are the things I need to work on just to be healthy in general.
Yeah, because when the body's healthy, everything starts to work.
Right.
You can't just treat the thyroid without improving other things.
Right. And I think that's a key distinction between what allopathic medicine is and what functional medicine should not be. And even though a lot of people come to see me because I talk a lot about thyroid physiology or talk through the lens of thyroid physiology, I am not a thyroid specialist. I don't consider myself a thyroid specialist. I consider myself a really good generalist, because somebody who's going to, in functional medicine, can't be just focused on thyroid physiology and help someone. They have to understand the tie to gut physiology, how respiration changes thyroid physiology, how gut flora changes, how thyroid hormone plays a role in and is tied into sexual hormones and their regulation, right? So you have to be a really good generalist, not it's great to know a lot about thyroid physiology, but if that's all you know, I don't think you're really doing functional medicine at the core.
And I think it's great as well because you and Dr. Kelly, the co-author, you've both been working with clients and patients for years and years now. And it's not like you're just reading the research and then writing a book about it. You know that sometimes something in a study might work, but in the real world, it might not be like easy to implement, or it might give the complete opposite response because people's bodies are completely different.
Absolutely. And I had a functional medicine practitioner that we just had an initial consultation the other day, and we went through her blood work, and I kind of showed her all the patterns. Okay, here's the issues, here's the patterns of problems. And she's like, but what I learned about in my functional medicine training didn't explain it that way. I'm like, right, functional medicine training, when you're going through that initial base training, is like med school, like it's kind of like chiropractic school. It gives you some foundational stuff, but a lot of the stuff that we learn, especially early on, you learn a lot of protocols, and they're great at a seminar to say, hey, here's the protocol, this supplement for this supplement for that. But that doesn't really work that way.
I tried that like a couple of times and it never worked out.
No. And she had a organic acid panel done, like an organic acid test done, and then there was the recommendations based on the algorithm, and she's like, I followed all those recommendations and I didn't feel better. I'm like, right, because that's not unique to you.
Like
That's just saying,
generated report.
yeah, I said these things. Now, be fair, she's new to functional medicine, right? But she learned an organic acid test. It's a fantastic test, and you can learn this, and here's the nutrients that are deficient, and she just started taking the nutrients that are deficient. I'm like, that's really, I said that that's out there for somebody who's just learning to kind of get an idea of maybe what to do, but that never works. What you need to do is really start to learn. Once you start doing this stuff for a bit, you'll start to learn how to interpret that organic acid test based on signs and symptoms, based on blood work. How do these things integrate with each other? And then you'll go from, oh, I need all these micronutrients, down to, oh, there's a couple things here I need to do strategically, and you'll get a much, much better result.
Yeah, I'm like, why is she deficient in all of those nutrients in the first place? Like, if she's
Right.
not absorbing, then she's not even going to absorb the supplements that she's
Right.
spending hundreds of dollars on.
Right. If you see them that nutrient deficient, you have to ask, is this a person who's not consuming a very healthy diet? Or is this a person who can't absorb the stuff? They're not breaking their food down. They're not digesting it. They're not absorbing it appropriately. Those are the better questions to ask. But as a new practitioner, she's not there yet, right?
Yeah. And with your help now, she'll learn what's needed.
Yeah, and that's a big part of what I do with my clients, whether they're practitioners, and I have a lot of those, but if just lay people, I want them to understand their blood chemistry panel. Like, hey, if your doctor tells you you're hypothyroid or you're not hypothyroid, you should be able to look at these other tests and get an indication of, hey, I don't have enough tissue, a thyroid hormone at the tissue level, at my liver, at my adrenal gland. And so you can see that even though the blood levels may be normalized by taking a bunch of hormones, the tissue levels aren't normalized, and we can see those patterns. And then you'll understand that, no, even though he said that, I know I still have an issue with my liver getting enough thyroid hormone because my cholesterol's high, my LDL's high. I know I have a problem at my adrenal gland because I can't make cortisol. My cortisol's low. Why would my cortisol be low? Well, guess what? You need T3 at your adrenal gland to bring that cholesterol in and into the mitochondria and make it into cortisol. So do you need more cortisol stimulation? No. How about we figure out why the adrenal gland is being downregulated?
And is there any additional like testing, or has your approach changed at all since you started writing the book to when it was released? Like any new research or data that's come out about thyroid health?
Every day there's another paper, right? So it's all about trying to just tie pieces together. So definitely there's more on the horizon. And Kelly and I are in the process at the moment of putting together a clinician training program. So we'll be filming at the end of October. So we'll hopefully have that out with that'll have some more advanced stuff than is in the book, so that people can get an idea of these patterns. And that's what I really want people to, physicians to, especially to understand is, hey, TSH looks good, T4, T3 may look good in the bloodstream, but what do the tissue patterns tell us? The tissue patterns are going to be the indicator of whether the person's converting that T4 to T3 to cell level, or if the T3 is really really reflects what's going on in the cell. And especially if they're on T3 therapy. A lot of times people think, hey, if I'm on T3 therapy and my T3 is normal in the blood, I'm good. And
Only if
no.
it was that easy.
Yeah, I wish it was. I wish it was, but it's not. And I get a lot of clients that have seen some of the, thyroid experts who have told them you can't convert T4 to T3, and they're on. I've got a gal right now. When she started seeing me, I think she was taking 150 micrograms of T4 and 80 micrograms of T3 per day. And she still has a thyroid gland, and she feels awful. And I'm like, because you're taking about 2 times the amount of thyroid hormone that you would make in the day for your size. And so you're essentially shutting down thyroid gland production. It'll never produce anything, and you're shutting down the peripheral conversion. So I understand somebody who thought, hey, more is better, more is better, more is better, but that's not the way the physiology works.
And what about, I've stopped looking at the research with COVID and lockdowns. I've tried to blank it out of my mind since everything's kind of calmed down a little bit. Has there been any research in particular about like long COVID and thyroid, or anything about maybe mortality rates, or is someone at higher risk with thyroid issues?
There's a bunch of thought process and hypotheses on it. There's a number of papers talk about increased risk of COVID with somebody who's already has a hypothyroid condition. There's association between COVID and developing hypothyroidism. But I think it still goes back to the same things I talk about in the book. If you get an infection, and that is going to initiate kind of a cell stress, cell danger response. And so anytime we get sick, there's a level of tissue hypothyroidism goes on. If you're a person who doesn't have a lot of underlying load on their system, you might get COVID and recover and have a temporary tissue hypothyroidism and then come back. But if you already have a massive load, right, then that adding a virus or to that load may push you into an excessive response, and it may be hard to get out of that. Kind of like we talked before we got on, like, hey, I got exposed to mold and now I got more chronically ill. Was it just a mold thing, or was it that added to the load I already had? And that was the reason. So I think there's literature. The literature is interesting.
What about the other way? Like, is someone with hypothyroid more at risk of picking up viruses and infections? Like, how does the thyroid support the immune system?
Well, there's a huge tie between the thyroid physiology and the immune system, but I think what we see in people with hypothyroidism is it depends. And so it depends on what's the state of their immune system. So Cyrex Labs has a test called the lymphocyte map test. And I think that's telling when we look at somebody's lymph map test to see what's the balance in their immune system. Do they have higher levels of natural killer cells or lower levels of natural killer cells? Are they Th1 dominant or are they Th2 dominant? Like, what's going on with their Treg cells? So the state that they're in probably plays a role to their susceptibility. And we can even look at secretory IgA. What's the role there? If they have an already hyperactive secretory IgA system, they may be less they may not get COVID, a significant COVID response, because the immune system's hyperactive and maybe fighting it off right away. Or they could have a reduced secretory IgA system, and so that virus has an easier time getting into the system and creating a problem. And then what happens with it is really based on what's happening with that natural killer cells and the rest of the T and B cell physiology, especially that T cell physiology. So I think what we see is going to be dependent. So if you think about the secretory IgA system, right, that's like the Marines, right? It's the defense. It's a kind of our first line defense of all of our mucous membranes, right? Nose, mouth, oral cavity, lungs. And if it's pretty functional or overactive, it may be killing off the virus right away, not getting a chance. The downside to having sometimes that hyperactive secretory IgA system is it may become overactive to even things like foods, right? And now we can get a lot of food reactivity or food sensitivity. So it's a balance between if that secretory IgA system is too weak, then you may get more bacteria, more viruses that get into the system, and the immune system doesn't get activated appropriately, and then we can have a more significant response in our system from those organisms. And so I think it really depends.
Yeah, the natural killer cells and secretory IgA for me a few years ago were really low. So that's why I was picking up all of these infections, and I had candida overgrowth and parasite infections that wouldn't clear. And it's because my immune system wasn't strong enough. But I think mold did have a massive effect on my health, but we were talking before and how for a while I blamed everything on mold, but then forgot about all of the other ways that I mistreated my body and wasn't eating good. I was eating gluten and I was sensitive to it. I was on the birth control pill for several years. I was trying to lose weight by over-exercising and not eating enough food, but I blamed everything on mold. And healing from mold did make a huge difference in my symptoms, but now I've become much more balanced, in my opinion. And I know that a healthy, strong body should be able to tolerate small amounts of mold. You obviously don't want to be living in a building that's got mushrooms and mold hanging from the ceiling, but a lot of clients who I work with, and even for me, the mold isn't visible. And it's not that they're living in like terrible conditions. It's small amounts of mold, or maybe the way that the buildings are made and created these days, maybe humidity levels are getting too high. But you did mention the importance in your book of clean air and clean food and clean water, eating organic, filtering your water. So you said that you spoke to someone about mold the other day and have changed your opinion a little bit on testing and your approach to that. Would you share a little bit more about what you covered?
Yeah, I think originally I've always kind of looked at mold issues like we're all exposed to mold, and you can have two people living in the same home, and one is devastated by it, and the other person is doesn't seem to even be bothered by it, right? And so you have this, and it's like pollen in the air, right? Like, oh, it's pollen, that's the problem. Well, I'm standing in the same pollen. I'm breathing the same pollen. Why am I not as aggravated by it? And that comes down to my immune system, right, compared to your immune system, and how it's responsiveness or hyper responsiveness. So when it comes to mold, I think that can be a big potential issue, which is, I apologize for my dog. Okay. My wife. To get my wife to take the dog out, let him outside.
He's got something to say.
Yeah, I think we got some guys doing some work next door. But the issue becomes, there we go. So when we're thinking about what's going on with mold, one of those things we want to take into consideration is, why is somebody overly responsive to it, right? And that comes down to that really comes down to the immune system. The next thing we need to consider is, how do we assess it? And so early on, we had these urine mycotoxin tests, and that was the test that, everybody was kind of initially doing, like, hey, are we exposed to mycotoxins? And we do that test. And I did those tests as well. And the problem I have with the test, and when you're learning about it, you're doing it, you're like, this is awesome that we have it. But if you're exposed to mold, is it good or bad to see mold metabolites in your urine? Right? And some people would say, well, if you have a lot of urine metabolites of mold, that means you have mold toxicity and that's compromising your health. Well, I don't know if that's true.
Mm.
What's the body's job if you're exposed to mold, you're going to get toxins, and what your body should do is eliminate it. Isn't that what's showing up in your urine?
Does it depend on like the species or how elevated they are or how many of them are present?
Well, that's a great question, right? But if you're exposed and you're inhaling spores, or you're inhaling, you're getting toxins into the system and you don't see it, which is the bigger issue?
Mm.
I know I'm exposed and I don't see anything showing up in my urine, or I know I'm exposed and I see stuff showing in my urine. What would be the bigger concern?
Well, mine
To
was like
me,
off the
it's
charts really high, and I was like
Mhm.
quite sick. So it's good that I was detoxing and getting it out, but it was also showing me that my home, even though it looked fine, it wasn't healthy to be living there. Maybe
Mhm.
whilst I was healing, maybe I would be
So
fine if I healed somewhere else and came back.
right. So it tells you that you're exposed. Okay. But if it's negative and you're
Mm.
living in that environment, you're still
Yeah.
exposed. So a negative test in an environment where you've got good mold exposure should tell you, hey, I've got problems with my detoxification pathways. And I just went over this with somebody who was living in an extremely moldy environment, not feeling well. And I've just reviewed all his labs the other day, and he was like, he said, what's ironic was I was chronically ill, but my urine myco tests were negative. And then now I'm out of that environment and I just had a test done and the values are high. So I guess he's like, my new environment must be loaded with mold. So we just
Yeah.
had somebody come in, they can't find mold anywhere. I said, listen, you're doing a bunch of things to work on your GI tract, and you're doing a bunch of healthy things, and you change some of those things. That stuff that's showing up in your urine is probably your body
It's a
releasing
good
those
sign.
things. Yeah. And so it's the same. So I'm like, that's a good thing. So I'm not opposed to people doing urine mycotoxin testing, but I think we've got to be careful when we're assessing it. Right. And so, because you can have a husband and wife, one of them is ill, and it seems like they have mold related illness, and their test maybe is got like low levels. I've seen this where they've got lower levels,
Mm.
and the spouse who's healthy, right, has high levels, and they're like, oh, well, it can't be mold because my levels are low and his levels are high, right? That can't be the reason I'm ill. I'm like, no, it can be the reason you're ill, but you're not releasing that stuff. You're in the same environment. So if you have exposure and you're ill, and you see it in your urine, then that's a great reason to go check your environment, right? Where is it coming from? Maybe I need to remediate it. If you do those like for the spouse, he's like, why am I not sick? I don't think we need to check the house. I said, well, there's a different piece here that he wasn't understanding, because he didn't want to spend the money on the remediation. But I said, your spouse is chronically ill, and there's exposure and there's loss of tolerance. So Cyrex Labs has a test that looks at loss of tolerance, right? Now they're making antibodies to Stachybotrys, Aspergillus, right? Penicillium, right? So those things that may not be problematic for one partner, that other partner, as soon as they're exposed to it, their immune system is reacting to it, right? So there's the big difference, right? Is that, have I lost some tolerance to this stuff? So it doesn't matter where I go when I get exposed to it, my immune system is going to be like, whoa, flare up, right? So I think if we want to know if mold is really a kind of a primary focus of our issue, something like a Cyrex test is going to say, hey, your immune system is negatively, or I don't know, however you want to say it, positively or negatively responding to this. but just seeing urine, mold, toxins, metabolites in the urine doesn't necessarily mean that that is the thing that's driving the process. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because some of it can be contaminated by food, even if they've had coffee and like bread before and the grains are contaminated. Coffee is like one of the highest contaminated foods as well. It could just be from the foods that they've eaten. So I try and like reduce. I use the test with some clients, but sometimes you can just tell based on what they describe their home to be like and the types of symptoms that they have. Sometimes you just know and you can save them £300 on doing a test, because it comes back to it again. You can't treat a lab test. You have to look at the health history, and it's not just mold that's contributed to how they're feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was looking at this person sent me their organic acid test, right? And there's like I have all these fungal markers that are elevated. I'm like, yeah, but that might be from your food. What were you eating prior to the test, right? And so when we went through what they were eating prior to the test, I'm like, this could just be from food. And I said, so if your home was checked, nothing's there, and you do your organic acid and you've got these things, it may be from food. You did it, the same person did a GI test and there's no yeast or on the test or other fungal things on the test that were evaluated for. So I'm like, it's probably food. So let's just clean up the diet a little bit. Let's put less concern, because that can create a ton of anxiousness and anxiety chasing something that may not actually be the primary thing. And now you neglect all the things that are much simpler to address, right? And so you forget, like as you
it's
said,
the house, and then they're not sleeping, and then they're exhausted, and then they can't go to the gym, and then they're not moving their body, and then they're not detoxing, and it's just like a vicious cycle.
And it creates, people say, well, you're just anxious. Well, yes, but we worry, right? And then as we worry, we increase our fight or flight hormones. And those fight or flight hormones, especially if there's compromised detoxification, don't clear real quickly. And now they kind of drive the process. And as we get more anxious, it just becomes a vicious cycle. So we see this with a lot of clients who are sometimes their own search or their own sometimes excessive, I don't know how to say it, but their own search or their own drive to try and find the thing, this thing creates so much stress and anxiety that it becomes part of the load that's causing their health issues. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's like they're constantly telling themselves that something's wrong, like they're sick, something's harming them, they must find it, and that is so stressful. It doesn't need to be a physical stress, it could be imagined perceived stress.
And once that limbic system is wound up, it can get plasticized really easily. And now that just becomes how they behave, how they act. And then maybe they wind up with a diagnosis of something like OCD or chronic anxiety or some other disorder like that.
I had like mold PTSD from finding out about that and moving, and just like not wanting my parents to come around and visit my new apartment in case they contaminated my furniture. It was honestly crazy. But I honestly just wanted to get better. I was just so desperate after all of those years. I then thought mold was the missing piece that was the answer to everything. And it did make a significant improvement. But me not seeing my parents because I didn't want them to contaminate my house, that was going to affect my health. Because I'm like isolating myself, not going out to visit anyone because I just wanted to heal in my little bubble.
Yeah, and you can't live in that bubble, right? Because every time you go outside, you're getting exposed to mold, right? Every time somebody, comes to visit you, right? Some things that you brought. So it becomes down to how do we make this body stronger, more resilient, right? So that you can tolerate more of that stuff. And you might, if you know that mold, hey, I've lost tolerance to mold, or I'm excessively exposed, and that's creating some increased stress to my tissues. You got to address it. But I don't think it's healthy to live in chronic fear, because that creates a ton of stress and anxiety. And now your emotional fitness goes in the tank, and you're only as healthy as the weakest link, right? So we've got to be cautious and make sure that we're not like creating another in an effort to try and find the one thing that we're not creating problems in a whole bunch of other categories. Hey, I'm not sleeping because I'm staying up late. I'm on the computer all the time, searching, right? I'm not eating well because I'm so busy researching, right? I'm not talking to anybody, right? Because I'm just searching, right? And so we have to be really cautious.
I can see people like following along. They're like, yeah, they're calling me out right now.
But I listen, I know how
No,
it
we've been
is,
there,
right?
so we
Yeah, I
can
know
do
how it
that.
is. You know how it is. Even when I'm researching something, I've got 8 tabs open on my computer from this morning, right? So I could easily lose 3 to 4 hours going down a rabbit hole chasing the impact of vasopressin on cellular physiology. No problem, right? So I totally get it. I totally understand it. And I don't want to talk to anybody when I'm trying to do this. Hey, leave me alone. I'm in a deep dive here. But you got to be cautious with those things.
And even like any practitioners listening, just be really careful how you talk to people about their symptoms and their health, because just one thing that you say could stick with them forever. It's like where people go to a conventional doctor and they can literally tell them that they're going to struggle to have children when they're grown up, even when they're 13, because they've got PCOS. And then they literally struggle with infertility, partly because of the belief that that's what they're going to have.
Sure. Yeah. And I think people would say, oh, you're anxious, whatever. Yeah, if you tell somebody you'll never have children, some
That's
people are going to be
truth, isn't
like,
there?
well, you want to bet? I'm going to prove you wrong. And the other people are going to be like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to have kids. And they're going to live and manifest what goes on between the 6 inches of their ears.
And especially when it's an authority figure telling them, they believe doctors know everything and will fix them, but you have to like fix yourself.
And I think the important thing is for all of us to realize and be humble is we really don't know that much. I mean, every day I learned something I didn't know yesterday. And the things that we were told a decade ago, 2 decades ago, we're learning now aren't really true. The whole serotonin depression thing, you see that, how many millions of people have been medicated based on flawed research and science, right? How about low fat, fat makes
But
you
they do
fat,
it. They
right?
do it really sneakily, don't they? They like just slowly change the guidelines, and I think they put with the cholesterol thing. Cholesterol is no longer a nutrient or hormone of concern. They just like snuck that in there in the food guidelines after years of telling us that red meat and eggs and butter are bad for our health.
Oh, it's funny because they'll stand up and stick the flag in the ground when they've got the new thing. This is it, blah, right? And then when it's, oh, this was wrong. Yeah, take the flag down. Oh, yeah, right. And don't let anybody know. And we never said that, right? And yet, but those are the things. So anytime somebody says something, we have to have a little bit of, okay, maybe, right?
Question everything.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things to question. Even in the functional medicine space, I question almost everything because I've learned a bunch of stuff. Some of it worked out well, and some things don't work out. And you learn things, and you go, "This doesn't make sense." Right? It doesn't make sense. When people were telling me, and I was learning that, hey, reverse T3 blocks T3 receptors at the nucleus, and that's the problem, and that's why you need to give higher dose T3. I was like, I don't know that makes sense. Initially, I thought it made sense, and then you start saying, well, okay, it doesn't seem, yeah, it does. They're not mirror images. Reverse T3 doesn't really bind with any high level affinity to nuclear receptors. Why are we telling people this stuff? But it just kept, and I kept trying to figure out where it came from. But
Becomes like
this
the
stuff
game of telephone, doesn't it? You just like,
yeah,
people keep passing on the information and just repeating what they hear.
absolutely. And unfortunately, it becomes truth, right? When it isn't really validated at all, but yet it keeps getting pushed on, pushed on, pushed on, and it sometimes at the detriment of clients. And I talk about ferritin, and right in the functional medicine community, and you may have a different opinion too, but I just had to talk to somebody yesterday, and they're like, my functional medicine doctor has me on iron because they said my ferritin level should be up in the 90s. And I'm like, based on what?
Yeah, I saw that in your book. You like it much, much lower, don't you?
Well, yeah, based on scientific literature, Douglas Kell, who's from your side of the pond, is one of the premier scientists in the world on iron physiology, and there's agreement in his community that ferritin is a tissue protein, not a serum protein. So that when we see elevations in ferritin, that's indicative of tissue damage and inflammation, and so we shouldn't be trying to increase ferritin levels because that's a tissue storage protein, not a serum protein. And I realized this early on because I learned it too. And so I would give everybody iron because everybody's ferritin was early on. I was seeing a lot of people, their ferritin level was under 90. So I thought I had to give it to them. And when you give them a bunch of iron when they don't need it, that increases oxidative stress and they don't do well. They don't feel well. And you give them dysbiosis in their bowel and you create a whole bunch of issues. And I'm like, this is not making sense. I'm trying to get them. They're telling me they're worse, and I'm doing what I've learned. And then you start digging into the literature and you're like, oh, wait a minute, maybe we shouldn't be driving it up. And now COVID made that evidently clear because they're looking at ferritin levels around over 100 as an indicator of COVID infections in women. So you go, oh, wait a minute. If 100 is where they're starting to go, whoa, maybe we have a COVID infection. Why are we trying to get people to 90?
That's what we were told, like 70 to 100. And I always knew that above, if it got too high, it can cause inflammation. But that in your ranges would be like through the roof.
Yeah. And so if you consider being down at 25 for ferritin, almost everybody in functional medicine would probably say they're anemic. But are they? Well, let's look at the rest of their let's look at the rest of their iron panel. Let's look at their CBC and diff. If they have an anemia pattern, is it anemia of inflammation or is it anemia of iron deficiency? And then we do have a test that'll differentiate that, which is your soluble transferrin receptor. So if you think that you need to jack up somebody's iron levels because their ferritin's low, before you do that, consider running a soluble transferrin receptor test. If that's high, yeah, they have an iron deficiency. If it's not high, then their cells are saturated with iron, so they don't need more iron. And that, so there's things that we learn and we think are truth, and then as we start to just dig a little bit deeper, we go, you know what, that's a little bit of functional medicine myth, and maybe we need to revise those things. But I think it's important. So as the people who are doing it, we could be wrong. The person who's the client should be like, okay, I can I listen, follow advice, but if it doesn't sound quite right, consider that maybe it isn't, right? And you can do a little bit of homework and research and say, eggs are bad for you because they have cholesterol. Does that make sense? Right?
Even just like your intuition, I used it quite a lot through my healing journey, and it can honestly like guide you so much more than what other people are saying.
Absolutely. If getting back to the iron, if somebody says your ferritin's low, I'm going to give you a bunch of iron, and you don't feel well on it, that's a good sign. That's probably not the right strategy, right?
And I did a post on iron the other day because I agree. I feel 25 might be low, but I'm like open to your experience with that, because we are bombarded by iron through food, fortified foods, and you need certain nutrients to absorb iron as well. So it could be like a copper or vitamin A issue, and it could be a B vitamin deficiency. and not necessarily just iron. But someone commented, and I'm guessing people are thinking this as well, why do, let's say someone has really heavy periods and they have low ferritin, why would they then feel better if they took iron, if iron's not the problem? Or do you agree that it could be iron in that situation?
Oh no, in that
iron?
situation, absolutely, right? We don't have a great way of getting rid of iron. So that's where we have to look at our client, right? Is this a person who doesn't eat a lot of animal protein, right? They really, maybe they're vegetarian or vegan, and if their serum iron's low, their iron saturation's low, their ferritin's low, their CBC and diff may show an anemia pattern, then you run a soluble transferrin receptor and say, okay, this is a person who's not getting enough iron in their diet. That's their number one issue, and we need to improve that. And so let's get them, if they can't, because of their philosophical or emotional beliefs, they won't eat richer sources of iron, then we got to get them supplemental iron, right? If it's somebody who's got a heavy menstrual cycle and they're doing a lot of bleed, then what we need to do is say, okay, they have a great potential for anemia because they got a super heavy blood loss and it's chronic. So they are a person who might be anemic. So what do we do? Let's run a soluble transferrin receptor test to confirm that they are anemic, and let's put them on iron. I have some patients on iron now. I've got a woman who's, I don't measure it, but she measures her flow volume every month. And because we started out and it was really high and now it's getting better, but because she bleeds so much, and it's been going on for so long, she has a need for iron. So she's on some iron. Okay. But the vast majority of people, I don't think, have an iron deficiency unless they have a bleed somewhere.
The risk factors.
Right. So if somebody was truly iron anemic, especially if it was a dude, I would be going, let's get that gut checked.
Yeah,
let's find out where's the blood going. You're eating animal protein every day. Where is your blood going? So this is one of those things where I talk about this in the book as well. You can't look at a value, one lab value, and make a decision. You have to look for patterns of problems. And in that situation, if somebody had a ferritin level between 25 and 50 and everything else looked really good, I wouldn't be concerned about it at all. I'd be like, maybe that's okay for them, right?
Yeah.
There's no other inflammatory markers. They feel fantastic. CBC and differential's good. Their iron saturation's within range. Their serum iron's good. I'm not worried at all, right? But if I start seeing that creeping up over in 40, 50, and now I see CRP is elevated, I know they got dysbiosis. Yeah. Then I'm going to start to say, hey, this is going to be this is going up. Probably liver's pumping out a bunch of ferritin to act as a scavenger molecule to start to clean up the free iron, because if tissues are getting damaged, free iron is going to be released. What do organisms love as a fuel source? Iron is a primary fuel source. Matter of fact, we're always fighting the organisms for iron. They have tools to steal the iron from us, and we have tools to keep it. That's one of the things that happened with COVID. Really important thing to consider is each individual and their situation, and a lab value, whether it's ferritin or TSH. Hey, my TSH is 4.5. Is that a problem? Well, it's lab high, but that may be appropriate. So do I need to do something? I don't know. What's the rest of the panel show, right? If their free T4 was normal and their free T3 is low and their TSH is higher, I may say, whoa, I would wait and see that elevated TSH is going to drive more T4 to T3 conversion. So you may just be seeing a swing of what's going on. But then I also want to look at the rest of the rest of the blood panel and say, what do your lipids look like? Are you insulin resistant? Are you gaining weight, right? So we want to see it. If somebody has a lower T3 or free T3, we want that TSH to actually be higher to drive more production. Right? So that helps with the conversion. So I would think that if they had normal TSH or low TSH, and they had a higher T4 and a lower free T3, and they had signs and symptoms of hypothyroidism, that's a bigger problem than the higher TSH.
Yeah, so at least the body is trying to do something about it. It's not like it's a disease state where it can't function anymore.
Correct.
And what are some of the other things, like if you could list or share some of the most important ones that cause this high inflammation, high oxidative stress, cellular hypothyroidism? I know you cover it in the book, and we've mentioned a few things during the episode, but yeah, what are the most important things that you see driving health issues these days?
Well, I think when we think about factors that people don't put a lot of attention to, one of those is definitely respiration.
Mm.
Um, just because of diet and lifestyles today, we have a tendency to have a higher inflammatory state. We just look at the population is much heavier than we were, even a couple decades ago. And so when we're heavier, we have more obesity, that'll trigger inflammation. Fat cells release inflammatory chemicals that trigger inflammation. But when we lay down at night, our mucous membranes tend to swell due to that inflammation. Nasal passages get cleared off, and we have a tendency to open our mouth to breathe. And that becomes an issue and a problem. When we breathe through our mouth, we create tissue hypoxia. So we blow off more carbon dioxide. We may be more oxygen saturated, but to get the oxygen off the red blood cells into the tissues, you need to have sufficient levels of carbon dioxide in the bloodstream. And so if we have lower levels of carbon dioxide because we're mouth breathing a lot, now the tissues starve of oxygen. That hypoxia causes problems at the cell level. It causes that cellular downregulation that creates some inflammation. It creates some oxidative stress. And that is going to just downregulate thyroid hormone. So just the fact that somebody's mouth breathing through the night chronically, a little bit, like every night, that is going to start downregulating their cellular metabolism. And who's going to pay attention to that? Because almost everybody I talk to says they don't mouth breathe when they sleep. How do you know? I just know. Well, how do you know? Because I know I would. My husband says I don't. Does he snore? Oh, he snores terribly. So he's not even paying any attention to how you sleep, right? And if you're waking up and he's staring at you while you're sleeping, that's creepy,
You
right?
need a new husband.
Right. So, but it happens to so many of us and we don't realize it. There are cues that you're probably mouth breathing, right? Hey, I might wake up with a dry mouth. I have a lot of gum disease. I have a lot of cavities. How about I wake up a lot at night to pee, right? Because when you breathe through your mouth, it changes the amount of vasopressin you have. So you create more urine. And so now when you go through your sleep and wake cycles, when you're in that lighter sleep, your bladder is being stretched because you're making more urine. You got to get up to pee. So almost everybody, when I ask them, do you mouth breathe? They say no. I'm like, how many times do you get up at night to pee? Oh, I'm up all the time at night to pee. Then you're mouth breathing probably.
And do
So
you recommend mouth taping?
absolutely,
Yeah.
mouth taping and breathing exercises during the day to help retrain nasal breathing. And it was a huge issue for me because I've got a deviated septum. I've broken my nose so many times. It should be fixed. I'm a chicken to go get it fixed. But if I have the least a bit of inflammation going on, drink some alcohol, my nasal passage will close and I'll want to open my mouth. So, mouth taping is a thing that helps retrain kind of the ability to keep that shut at night. And then doing a lot of nasal breathing exercises helped me significantly, so that aspect is not triggering problems. So I think that's a huge issue and something that people can address on a daily basis. It doesn't cost you anything to slap some mouth tape on and do some breathing exercises, and that could dramatically change your cellular physiology and improve your tissue hypothyroidism and help you burn fat. Because remember, most people want to burn fat, right? They have extra body fat, they want to burn it, but it requires oxygen in the cell to burn fat efficiently.
And I did a episode that was years ago now, but it was really great with Dr. Gelb. He talked all about, he's a dentist in New York, and he talked all about mouth breathing products, and orthodontics and everything like that. So definitely check that out. I'll link it in the show notes too. Another one I wanted to touch on, because we didn't get a chance to cover it last time, and I know that you're really passionate about fitness and exercise and movement, but I'm sure that some of your patients and clients as well tend to go to the other extreme. You're probably not working with people who don't really move at all. It's probably people who are already trying to be healthy, but some people take it to the extreme where it's another case of they think more is better when it comes to fitness.
Yeah, and I've got people who are non-mobile, right? Don't do anything. And then you got the people who are doing a lot of stuff, and that's contributing to part of their issue. And it happened to me: overtraining, undersleeping, poor breathing. It was a trigger for my Hashimoto's. But for the people who are, I think strength training is fantastic, but you have to allow for recovery. The older we get, the probably more time you're going to need for recovery. And part of that recovery requires optimal sleep, which requires proper breathing to be able to sleep well, to recover well. So all that piece goes. But where I see a lot of people get themselves in trouble is when they want to do cardiovascular training. Okay. And so they want to go for a run because the run is good. If I run, I'm going to lose fat, right? And the idea and the concept is good, except most people run at a pace that's anaerobic. Okay. And when you run in an anaerobic pace, you shut down your body fat metabolism.
Is that like slow, steady state?
So
As
simple
opposed to doing
equation.
sprints?
Yeah, well, no, if you're going to do sprints, that's fine. Short durations of sprint activity is great. That is anaerobic, but it's only a short period of time and then the body can recover. What gets people in trouble is the 40 minutes, 60 minutes longer of running at a slower pace, but it's too fast to be aerobic.
Mm.
Okay. So a simple equation is 170 to 180 minus your age. That's for most people, as just a general rule, that's the good optimal aerobic range. So the person who goes out, gets on their bike, right? They want to go for a bike ride because that's going to get me in shape. If they're going up and down hills, they may be pushing for 2 or 3 hours on their bike in an anaerobic state, which is pretty stressful on the physiology. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you see the amateur weekend bike rider, you see gangs of them around here, and I'm one of them, but I don't do as much of it as I used to, because what you see is a lot of them have big bellies. And you wonder, and then you watch them, and what do? They ride on their bike, they're anaerobic for an extended period of time, and then they pull into the coffee shop, grab a coffee and some oatmeal, like lots of carbs and sugar and caffeine to fuel the next hour of their riding, right? Because you can't burn fat efficiently. And so this, I think, is one of those things it's really important when we're talking about physical fitness is if you're going to do cardiovascular endurance type activity, I think it's fantastic. I'm an endurance runner, so I totally understand. But get a heart rate monitor that range. This is not the perfect range for everybody because it's based on, this is a guy named Phil Moffatone came up with this value. We used to use 210 minus your age, and Phil, through his work, has said that's way too high. And so 170, 180 minus your range. And if you start going for a jog and you're over 180 minus your age, you need to slow down. And my clients are like, yeah, but then I'm only walking. Then you're only walking, and you'll do that until you can build up a pace, walk and jog, and try and keep it in that 170 to 180. And over time, you'll do better. That's why you see more people in the fitness world start talking about, hey, you don't need to run, just go for a walk. You'll burn more fat if you go for a walk, because guess what? When you go for that walk, it's more likely you're going to be in that aerobic range. But if you spend 2 or 3, 2 hours, an hour in an anaerobic state, you're putting a lot of stress on the system, and that can create some stress on the physiology and then result in that cell danger, cell stress, and trigger slowdown of your metabolism.
That's so interesting. Like I always knew that some clients, especially female clients with hormone imbalances, they would often do better with walking or strength training as opposed to chronic long distance cardio, running, marathon training, all of that. But I've always just put it down to that nervous system stress response. But to know it's because of the breathing, the heart rate, aerobic versus anaerobic. Yeah, it's just really interesting. So I'm glad I've learned something.
Yeah, think about it. If you're anaerobic, then you need to, how am I going to make glucose?
Mhm.
I got to rev up my cortisol,
Yeah.
right? Excessive cortisol production or excessive epinephrine production, right? To get glucose upregulated. Do that for an hour,
Mhm.
right? Not for 2
Yeah.
hours, maybe not so good on the system, right?
Some people might be like so happy to hear what you just said. They're like, I don't have to go running anymore. I can go for a walk. But it can be
Yeah.
the case.
But I mean, so what you do for physical training really depends on what you're trying to accomplish, right? If you're going to run a marathon, you have to train for a marathon. Then you could do appropriate heart rate training, but you still have to train for a marathon, right? But if your overall goal is, hey, I just want to be healthy and fit, then do strength training. Definitely do some type of slow cardio. Could be walking, could be jogging, if you, but stay in that range. Do some high intensity, like occasional sprints, because you need to do that in life anyway. You need to be able to do something, go up, sprint up and down some hills for a bit. Do stretch, strengthening, flexibility, mobility, and postural training. All things that are going to make you healthier just on a day in, day out basis, so you can do the things you need to do. If you're going to climb a mountain, you got to train for that. If you're going to do a CrossFit, you got to train for that. But that's different than trying to train just to be healthy and fit, right? If you're going to be a really good CrossFitter, even though they say they're the fittest people on earth, I would argue that, right? Most of those are not the fittest people on earth, right? You have the weird people that are super fit, but most high intense athletes have other issues going on with their health and physiology in an effort to be this elite looking athlete.
Yeah, I was talking about that with my friend the other day, and her response, because she gets all backlash saying they are healthy, like they have really low heart rate, like low body fat percentage. And she says, like, why do athletes have to retire when they're 30 years old then? And they're like, oh, like makes sense. If they were
Yeah,
like
I mean,
super fit, they could go forever, but it's obviously having a massive toll on their body.
yeah, you look at these, the mixed martial art community, they look super fit, right? But it's crushing the women to try and constantly suck weight. It's messing up their sex hormones, and it's messing up their GI tract and their physiology, all in an effort to be an elite fighter. But that's not healthy, especially when you're getting punched in the head regularly, right? So we have to be careful. There's people that look, they have a six-pack abs and they're like, "Rrr," and they look, we think that's the look of health, and really that's enhanced many times, and we don't see behind the curtain where, oh yeah, they have IBS and they have they're on hormone replacement therapy because their hormones are all screwed up, right? You just
Yeah,
see
we
the
get to
picture,
see their lab results, and they're not great.
right? And you go, yeah, that's not a healthy person, right?
No,
They
absolutely
have the
not.
look, but they're not healthy.
Absolutely not. I want to finish it up with just a few questions. You actually answered one before. I was going to ask you something that you've changed your mind about in the health world, but you covered like a few examples about how diet things change over the years. So my other two questions were, what's something that you've been into lately? So this could be like a book that you're reading, could be like a documentary that you've watched, something completely random, non-health related, but something that you've been enjoying that you want to share.
Wow, that's a great question. And maybe this is a sad state for me, but I am, what excites me on a daily basis is doing this geeky research stuff and looking at stuff. So right now I'm creating the course based on the book. I'm on a deeper dive into what's going on with female hormones and PCOS, and a much deeper dive into that, and probably do a presentation in the new year. And then outside of that geeky stuff, for whatever everybody wants to think, I'm an outdoorsman, I'm a hunter. This is my big season coming up. So that is my, like, people talk about meditation, everything else. For me, sitting out in the woods for 6-8 hours, it's like meditation, right? It is just no plug in, no research, just sitting with nature, doing what I'm doing out there. And I think for me, that's like it's a good recharge time.
Can be things like
Um,
fishing. For me, I'd be like sat fishing all day. My granddad does that like literally
mhm.
every day. And like, how do you do it? He goes at 4 a.m. and for him, that's his meditation.
Absolutely. And I had a friend once who said, "There's no way I could sit in a tree stand for 8 hours." I'm like, if you couldn't, you need to. And I said, it's not about, there's some people that have, that are anti-fishing, anti-hunting, all those things. But I think for those of us in the community, it gives us a greater connection to our environment. It gives us a
Mm.
greater connection to our food source. And there's something, man, it's something emotional that really impacts you when you are thankful that, hey, I had the blessings of being able to harvest my own food. I'm gonna use everything out of this animal as to nourish me. And I know it came off the land. There's something really spiritual and
Yeah,
emotional
I
about it.
agree. It's
Um,
all of the other people who are like hunting sharks and whales and just for fun or for fashion. That's what gives it a bad rap. But it's when people like yourself, you appreciate that more than probably someone like me who goes to the grocery store or the farm shop and just buys it. Like it's easy
it
to do
has a
that.
different, it does have a different meaning when you know, man, it took me 40 hours in the woods to get that. And that makes me think, especially here in the US, about our time. Like these people from your country and other countries that came over here and walked out into this wilderness and said,
Mm,
yep, we're going to figure this out. And you're like, think about it. I was in
yeah,
the,
it's crazy.
I'm in 40 hours to get an animal. And these guys, and these are people that are relying. I can go to the grocery store if I don't get some meat, but these people
They
didn't have a
couldn't.
grocery store to go to, right? So, man, it gives you a new perspective of what early people really had to work through. So it does, I think, gives you a different perspective on our nutrition and food, and a deep respect for the animals that we have and how to conserve them and have them available, for future generations.
Yeah, I love that. Is there a product that you couldn't live without? So this could be an appliance, a personal care product, a supplement, a herb.
I would say from a supplemental standpoint, as much as I am, do functional medicine, I use supplementation. I'm a minimalist.
Mm.
There are some products that I use pretty consistently. And one company that I really like their products, that's US Enzymes. And I've actually worked with them to formulate a sulforaphane product called sulforazyme. And for your listeners, so what is sulforaphane, what's the benefit? Sulforaphane comes from uh, plants, and the most nutrient sulforaphane dense product is broccoli sprouts. Okay, so when you eat a broccoli sprout, two things come together and produce this thing called sulforaphane. And the benefit of sulforaphane is that it's one of the best food upregulators of something called NRF2. And NRF2 is the master anti-inflammatory, antioxidant detoxifying enzyme. So when we activate NRF2, it turns on about 200 pathways. And that's significant. So most people have heard about glutathione. Hey, take glutathione, but that's one pathway. And there's the potential, if you're loading yourself with a bunch of glutathione, that you may downregulate NRF2. So sulforaphane is the best upregulator. Within 15 minutes of getting sulforaphane in the system, it's at the brain. So it can really upregulate the system. The beauty of it is it's got a really short half-life, so it's almost impossible to become toxic. And the literature and the research on it is really good and growing. NIH does a ton of work on sulforaphane and its benefits. And so I'm a fan of
Mm.
that, and I'm a fan of
Big
US
for
Enzymes and
like
Master Supplements.
hormonal cancers, things like breast cancer.
If you think about why, like somebody's
Yeah.
like, well, I know some people in the autistic community started giving the sulforaphane to their autistic clients, and they're seeing these nonverbals go to verbal, and they're like, why does this work? And I'm like, it's super simple. when you push the NRF2 system, you're pushing a lot of these anti-inflammatory, antioxidant systems that help anybody who's got oxidative stress and inflammation, because it's turning on the pathways that help produce those things naturally. And it works differently than taking an ibuprofen or an anti-inflammatory. We don't want to suppress the immune system. We just want to make sure that those inflammatory products, they get released, but we also metabolize them fairly quickly.
So it's like a more holistic, broad spectrum supplement rather than just taking like one thing to target one problem.
Yeah, I talk about this in a presentation I do. Like if you take glutathione and once you use it, now it's a free radical. Now you have to have catalase to help break that down. And then you need something else to break the next thing down, right? So if we can do something that turns on both the enzymes production, these anti-inflammatory, antioxidant production, and support the recycling pathways, that's probably the best option.
Might as well go with that.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So
Great.
That's a really good idea. So
cool. And last question, like where can people get the product and where can people find you from your social media, website, and your new book?
So Rejuvagen Center is my website. On Instagram, it's I think it's Dr. Balcavage or Dr. Eric Balcavage. I don't even remember anymore.
I'm going to link all of these as well, yeah. By the way.
I guess I'm most prolific kind of on Instagram, which is funny because probably right before we met, I didn't even have an Instagram account. And
I think you were, because I mentioned in the episode, like I've been enjoying, I think you'd just gotten into more education on there. Mm-hmm. So I did comment, I was enjoying it at the time, but yeah, you've produced tons more videos and clips of your podcast on there.
So that's like that's where most of my content lies. And then obviously the book is on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Balboa Press has it on their website, but I think Amazon and Barnes & Noble are probably the most common. So you can get it there. And then people can look forward to, we're doing a physician's course in the end of October, beginning November. We're going to be having a live seminar in Minneapolis and then film it. And so then we'll have a live physician practitioner's course, and then we'll be looking to do a lay course based on a lot of the principles in the book, especially part 3.
So a busy few months for you.
Yep.
Let's hopefully it doesn't turn into like another 3 years. Let's hope a little bit more smoothly.
Yeah, let's hope.
Well, thank you for joining me again. It was great to catch up with you, and thank you for covering more information on the thyroid. I would highly recommend the book. As I said, it's really just the thyroid Bible. If someone's brand new to it, or if someone's like slightly knowledgeable, I'd say like I was, yeah, you're going to find something out of there. And yeah, thank you for joining me again today.
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
I really hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, I would love for you to leave me a rating and review on your podcast app, as this helps to support the show and it allows it to reach more people with this valuable information. Come and say hi over on Instagram. I'm at Viva Natural Health. And if you haven't already, check out my website, vivanaturalhealth.co.uk, for tons more free resources and to discover how I could support you further. I currently offer one-on-one consultation packages if you want my top-level support, then more affordable group programs and self-paced online courses. So there really is something for everyone. If you're ready to change and get some answers but aren't sure which option would be best, take that first step today and apply for a free enrollment call on my website, and we'll discuss the best steps for you to take in order to achieve hormonal harmony. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you back here next week for another episode.